Formula One just realized something terrifying. The faster they made the cars, the closer they got to breaking the entire sport. We're talking about machines losing up to 50 kilometers per hour in the middle of a straight, drivers reacting in seconds to avoid crashes, and a system so flawed that even the FIA is now considering reversing one of the biggest decisions in modern F1. And at the center of it all? Max Verstappen, calling these cars unnatural from the very beginning. But here's the part no one expected. The solution isn't adding more power. It isn't changing the engines. It's removing what made these cars fast in the first place. Downforce. A drastic cut that could completely change how Formula One works, who dominates, and who disappears. Because if this goes through, the next era of F1 won't just look different. It will feel like a completely different sport. At first, none of this looked like a crisis. In fact, it looked like progress. The sport had a clear mission. Faster cars, closer racing, more sustainability. Everything sounded right. Everything looked under control. But underneath that vision, something didn't add up. Because when engineers started testing the future cars in simulations, they found a massive problem. The original design was simply too slow. Not a small difference, not something you could ignore. We're talking about cars that could be several seconds slower per lap compared to the current generation. And in Formula One, that's unacceptable. So the response was immediate. Add more downforce. Increase grip. Bring performance back. And just like that, the entire direction shifted. It worked, at least on the surface. The numbers improved. The cars became faster again. The gap closed. But here's the part that didn't show up in those early simulations. What happens when those cars are no longer in a perfect virtual world, but fighting real physics, real straights, real energy limits? Because that's where the hidden problem was waiting. And the moment the cars hit the track, drivers began to feel something strange. Not in the corners, where the grip was strong. Not under braking, where everything felt stable. On the straights. The place where cars are supposed to be at their absolute best. That's where things started to fall apart. Some drivers tried to adapt. Others started asking questions. And a few immediately understood that something was fundamentally wrong. Because this wasn't just about speed anymore. It was about consistency. Imagine pushing flat out, everything feels perfect, the car is alive beneath you, and then suddenly, without warning, the power drops. Not gradually. Instantly. That's the kind of unpredictability drivers began to face. And this is where a deeper issue starts to emerge. Because the cars weren't just fast machines anymore. They had become systems that required constant management. Energy saving. Energy deployment. Timing everything perfectly just to survive a straight without losing performance. And that changes the nature of racing completely. Because instead of attacking, drivers are calculating. Instead of pushing, they are holding back. And that tension, between what the car can do, and what it is allowed to do, is where the real story begins. But here's the detail that most people missed at the time. This wasn't caused by a single mistake. It was the result of multiple decisions stacking on top of each other. More downforce. More drag. More energy demand. More complexity. Each one made sense on its own. Together, they created a system that is now on the edge. And the moment that edge was crossed, everything changed. But here's where the situation turns from strange to dangerous. Because what drivers were feeling on those straights wasn't just a drop in performance. It was a sudden loss of power that could happen right in the middle of full speed. No warning. No smooth transition. Just a sharp, brutal cut. And this is where the term starts to matter. Superclipping. It sounds technical, almost harmless, but the reality is anything but. Imagine two cars flying down a straight. Both at maximum speed. Both pushing to the limit. And then, one of them suddenly loses half of its power. In a split second, the speed difference becomes massive. The car behind closes in rapidly, with barely any time to react. That's not just bad racing. That's a serious risk. And it already led to incidents where drivers were caught completely off guard by how quickly things changed. But here's the deeper issue. This doesn't happen randomly. It happens because the system runs out of energy. The battery, which provides a huge portion of the car's power, simply empties before the straight is over. And when it does, the car is no longer the same machine. It becomes slower, weaker, vulnerable. Now think about that from a driver's perspective. You're not just racing your opponent. You're racing your own energy limits. You're constantly asking yourself, can I push now, or do I need to save? Do I attack, or do I survive this straight? And that question changes everything. Because racing is no longer about who is faster. It becomes about who manages the problem better. And that's not what Formula One was supposed to be. But here's what makes it even more frustrating. The sport already tried to fix it. Adjustments were made. Energy limits were changed. Deployment rules were tweaked. On paper, it reduced the problem. In reality, it didn't remove it. The power drop still exists. The unpredictability is still there. Drivers are still forced into this constant balancing act. And this is where tension inside the paddock starts to grow. Because now there are two completely different perspectives. Some believe the system just needs more fine-tuning. Small changes. Careful adjustments. Time. But others, especially the drivers feeling it lap after lap, are starting to realize something else. What if the problem isn't the details? What if the entire concept is flawed? And that question is the one nobody can ignore anymore. Because once you start questioning the foundation, everything built on top of it becomes uncertain. And this is exactly where the divide inside Formula One becomes impossible to ignore. Because not everyone sees this problem the same way. On one side, you have the drivers, the ones actually inside the cars, feeling every single drop of power, every unpredictable moment on the straight. For them, the issue is simple. The system isn't working the way it should. It's not natural. It's not consistent. And more importantly, it's not racing the way Formula One is supposed to feel. Max Verstappen has been the clearest voice here. From the very beginning, he questioned the direction of these cars. Not just small complaints, not just frustration, but a deeper concern about what these machines have become. He even described them as something unnatural, almost like a combination of ideas that don't fully belong together. And when you look at what's happening now, that description starts to make uncomfortable sense. Because these cars are trying to do too many things at once. They are high downforce machines, designed to be fast in corners. They are energy-limited systems, designed to be efficient on straights. And they rely on complex active aerodynamics and electrical deployment just to function properly. Each part makes sense on its own. But together, they create tension. Now, on the other side, you have the teams. And this is where things get complicated. Because not every team is struggling. Some have already adapted to this system. Some have built cars that work within these limitations. For them, this isn't a crisis. It's an advantage. And when you're winning, you don't want change. You want stability. You want the rules to stay exactly as they are. Because any major adjustment could erase that advantage overnight. So now you have two forces pulling in opposite directions. Drivers pushing for change. Teams resisting it. And right in the middle, the governing body, trying to decide what matters more. Short-term stability, or long-term survival. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because this isn't just about performance. It's about philosophy. What kind of racing does Formula One want to deliver? Think about it like this. Imagine watching a sprint race where athletes are forced to slow down halfway through, not because they're tired, but because they're not allowed to use all their energy at once. It wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't feel pure. That's exactly what's happening here. Drivers are not always pushing flat out. They're calculating. They're managing. They're holding back, even when they don't want to. And that creates a version of racing that feels controlled instead of explosive. Strategic instead of instinctive. And for some people, that's not the essence of Formula One. But here's the turning point. Because once you accept that the issue is not just energy, not just safety, but the entire balance of the car, you are forced to confront a much bigger question. What if the real problem is the downforce itself? Because everything leads back to it. More downforce means more drag. More drag means more energy consumption. More energy consumption means the battery runs out faster. And once it runs out, the entire system collapses. So suddenly, the conversation shifts. Not how do we fix the energy system, but how do we reduce the demand? And that changes everything. Because solving the problem might not require adding something new. It might require taking something away. Something fundamental. Something that was originally added to save the sport, and is now threatening it. And this is the moment where Formula One faces its most uncomfortable realization yet. And now we arrive at the moment where everything flips. Because once you trace the problem back far enough, every road leads to the same place. Downforce. The very thing that was supposed to save performance, is now draining it. And the logic behind it is brutally simple. More downforce pushes the car into the track, giving it incredible grip through corners. That part is undeniable. But at the same time, it acts like a wall against the air. It slows the car down on the straights. It forces the engine to work harder. And most importantly, it forces the electrical system to spend more energy just to keep the car moving at top speed. It's like trying to run full speed while someone is constantly pulling you backwards. You can still move fast, but you burn through your energy much faster than expected. And that's exactly what's happening here. The cars are not just fast. They are heavy in resistance. So every straight becomes a fight. Not against another driver, but against physics itself. And this is where the realization hits. You cannot fix an energy problem if the car constantly demands more energy than the system can realistically provide. That's the core of it. That's the truth sitting underneath all the technical discussions. So the conversation inside Formula One started to change. Quietly at first, then more openly. And now, it's impossible to ignore. Instead of asking how to manage energy better, they started asking how to need less of it. And that question leads to one unavoidable conclusion. Reduce the downforce. Not slightly. Not carefully. Drastically. The current discussions point toward removing between 20 and 50 points of aerodynamic load. Almost a complete reversal of what was done before. And that's not just an adjustment. That's an admission. An admission that the original fix created a bigger problem. But here's where things get even more complex. Because removing downforce doesn't just solve one issue. It creates new ones. Less downforce means less grip in corners. Less grip means cars become harder to control. Drivers have to fight the car more. Mistakes become more likely. And suddenly, the balance shifts again. From energy management problems to mechanical and driving challenges. So now the sport is facing a trade-off. Do you want cars that are stable in corners but unstable on straights? Or cars that are more predictable in energy but more demanding to drive? There is no perfect answer. Only different compromises. And that's why this decision carries so much weight. Because it doesn't just fix a technical flaw. It defines how Formula One will feel. How it will look. How it will be experienced by drivers, and by everyone watching. And here's the part that makes this even more tense. This change cannot happen immediately. Teams have already built their cars around the current philosophy. Every wing, every surface, every tiny detail has been optimized for this level of downforce. If you suddenly remove it, everything becomes obsolete overnight. Years of work, gone. Millions invested, gone. Competitive advantages, erased. So the earliest realistic moment for this kind of change is the next cycle. And that delay creates pressure. Because every race that passes, the problem continues. Drivers continue to manage instead of attack. Moments of unpredictability continue to appear. And the gap between what Formula One is, and what it wants to be, keeps growing. Which leads to the most uncomfortable truth of all. This isn't just a technical correction. It's a reset. A decision to step back, and admit that the path forward needs to change. And once that door opens, there is no going back to the original vision. Only forward, into something completely different.